Welcome everyone to our second session of Introduction to Kabbalah. And it's nice to see your faces. And even those of you that are hiding your faces, it's nice to know that you're here. So tonight's discussion is going to focus on a little bit of history. If it looks like I'm looking around, it's because people are still coming in. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of Kabbalah. Our main focus is going to be on the Zohar, which is the central text of Jewish mysticism. and a very important element of the Zohar are the 10 Sefirot. Excuse me. Are the 10 Sefirot. And then another interesting element of Kabbalah is Gematria. Gematria is a way of uncovering secret meanings in the text, because every Hebrew letter has a number assigned to it. And as you will see, the way we tie our Tallit, the way we do a lot of things actually comes out of that numerical tradition. And the other thing which we'll do is just jump into several Kabbalistic texts. But I want to open by commenting on something we touched upon last week, and that is the interconnectedness of everything. And I think I mentioned to you that one of Larry Kushner's books on Kabbalah is called Invisible Lines of Connection. And that's the idea that in the Shema, we talked about this, when in the Shema we say, Adonai Echad, God is one possible way of understanding that phrase is that God is unity and everything is interconnected. And Bryce, representing the physics side of the house and the science side of the house, pointed out, of course, that's literally true, that every particle in the universe has a connection to every other particle of the universe, and, from a scientific side. But I also wanted to comment about the significance of things is related to their connections. So I want to hold up an old cutting board. I think you can see this. If you actually look at it end on, you can see it's kind of concave because so much cutting has taken place on this cutting board. And I can tell you a lot of it was hard salami. If I were to take this to Goodwill or to try and sell it at a yard sale, no one would want it. It's stained, it's used, it's probably about to break. But now if I told you that this cutting board was made by my father when he was in junior high school in wood shop, you would realize why it's one of my prized possessions. It's still the same cutting board that most of the world would find absolutely worthless, but because it's made by my father when he was a boy, that has tremendous value to me. That's the power of interconnectedness, multiplied, by everything in the universe. So we're going to continue with the text and with the program. As always, I want to thank Joel and Barbara Aronson and the Affordable Living Choices Trust for supporting my role as the community rabbi of Ventura County for the Jewish Federation, and want to remind you that although I think most of you know, if you're on my mailing list for this class, you get an email from me probably tonight or maybe tomorrow, giving you, a link to the video for the class, but also on my website. If you click on classes, you will see a copy of the slides. I haven't updated the slides. I keep adding as I prepare for classes. Before the end, I will update it with the final set of slides, a suggested reading list that also needs to be updated. The Learner's Guide to Blessings, which we'll talk about next week, and video of session 1. And of course, there'll be a video of this session. So just a word about Kabbalah. I think I might have discussed some of this last time. And again, as we get into this, I will say if questions occur to you as we're chatting, feel free to type them in chat. I do have my chat window open and I'm keeping an eye on it. And then also, if something burning is coming in, raise your hand. I hope you can raise your hand electronically because I can't see. It's hard for me to keep an eye on every one of you. And then I will pause a few times during the class to see if there's any questions or discussion. But in terms of a very quick overview of Kabbalah, in history, it was exclusively male. There were no female Kabbalists in history. It begins in Second Temple times. Second Temple times is the Second Temple is built around 100 to 200 BCE and then destroyed in the year 70 BCE. So that's the time frame I'm talking about, because there are some texts, particularly in the Bible, that are mystical in nature. The Ezekiel and some of the visions of God's throne seem to invite mystical speculation. And some of these continue even in our liturgy. As you may know, in a morning section of one of the prayers, we say, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzavot, Melech Kol Haaretz Kivodo, and we go up on our toes. That's a quote actually out of Isaiah, who has a vision of God's throne with seraphim, kind of burning celestial beings surrounding the divine throne and proclaiming God's holiness. Well, we want to get up there with the seraphim, so we stand up on our toes. But that's a very early mystical influence in Judaism. As time goes on, there are other mystical influences. There's the Hasidim in medieval Germany, which is different than the Hasidic movement, which starts about 600 years later. And it's probably heavily influenced by Christianity in that it tended to be very ascetic. Ascetic means denying the pleasures of the world. A lot of contemplation, deprivation, fasting. People were sitting in the snow in the winter, heavily influenced by Christian thought here. And that element of mysticism really never caught on. The goal, and we discussed this a lot last week, is always to deepen your connection with God. One of the phrases you hear discussed in Kabbalah quite a bit is devekut, which means to cleave to God. The word devek is a modern Hebrew word for glue. So and there's discussions about, in the Garden of Eden, that a man and his wife cleave together, and that word devek, the same Hebrew root, is used there. So it's always to deepen the connection. Typically, we discussed this last week, and there was some questions and interesting questions about it. It starts with being observant. I mean, if the commandments are clear, well, clearly that's a place to start. And now the Kabbalistic urge is to, how do I become even more and deeper connected with God? People asked last time, can I be a Reformed Jew and be a Kabbalist? Can I be a Kabbalist and be not so observant? It's a free country. You can do whatever you want. But I would say, if you were really into Kabbalah and take the text seriously, and I would say hyper literally. What do I mean? Well, we're going to talk about that. So, as a Reform rabbi, I don't necessarily believe what we have in our text is exactly what God dictated to Moses. But on the Kabbalistic end, they would say, and I have some, discussion of this, they would say what's in our sacred text is the outer shell of meaning. That's the simplest level of meaning. Of course, it was dictated by God to Moses. And now I want to go deeper and deeper and deeper into what God dictated to Moses, because since God is infinitely deep, then there must be infinite depths of meaning in the text. So I will be happy to entertain. Yeah, the Merkavah refers to, actually, the Merkavah is a chariot. And I think the name comes from a description or discussion of Elijah's chariot. And I think I mentioned last time, Merkavah in modern Hebrew refers to the latest version of the army tanks, the military tanks of the state of Israel. So beginning with the Zohar. The Zohar is the central text of Jewish mysticism. What you see in the middle is kind of a modern translation and commentary on the Zohar. clearly the best translation and commentary of the Zohar is by Daniel Matt, and I'm sure I described this. It's this book. I think there are about 12 or 13 volumes of this book, and this book actually has no Hebrew or Aramaic in it. It is strictly a translation with lots and lots of footnotes and commentary. And the origin of that translation was really interesting. Danny Matt has published a number of books. Here's one of them. It's on my reading list, called The Essential Kabbalah. And again, I don't know how well you can see this, but he will have quotes of texts, and then in the back, lots and lots of footnotes. And he was only, he was publishing small sections from the Zohar and other Kabbalistic texts. And a woman asked him once, what would you recommend as a good translation of the Zohar? This maybe was 25 years ago. And Dr. Matt said, there is no good translation of the Zohar. And she said, well, why don't you write one? And he said, that would take me and a team of graduate students and scholars probably the rest of my professional life to do. And she was from the Pritzker family with a lot of money, and she said, fine, I will fund you to do that. And that's what he's been doing for the last 20 years, in addition to his teaching, is doing this translation. And it's, as you will see, it is not simple, but at least there are footnotes and there's some help getting through it. Let's see what I have to say about the Zohar. The Zohar is a work of pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha is an English word. It is the opposite of plagiarism. In plagiarism, you take somebody else's work and claim it as your own. In pseudepigrapha, you write a work and you claim someone else wrote it. So the Zohar represents itself as having been written in the second century of the Common Era by Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a Mishnah teacher. These are early sacred texts beyond the Bible. And it's written in Aramaic, which was the language of the rabbis of that time. It is written in what is called Palestinian Aramaic. There are lots of different forms of Aramaic. So it was an attempt to write it in the language that these rabbis would have used. But as scholars study it, it's clear from very subtle things that it was actually written in 12th century Spain. Occasionally, medieval Spanish words creep in. And the scholarship on this is pretty clear. It was either written by Moshe de Leon or his students. So why did he present it as the work that was 1,000 years older? There's one theory that he believed, or he actually was channeling Shimon Bar Yochai. So from his point of view, it was an authentic text from Shimon Bar Yochai. Or from a practical point of view, if I write a book, actually I've done this. I have written a book. I know what happens. I've sold about 5,000 copies of my book. If I discover a book that was written by Shimon Bar Yochai and people believe it, I'm going to sell a lot more than 5,000 copies. So that's sort of the two ends of speculation on the Zohar. If you ask a traditional teacher, a Kabbalist, I would say most would say this was either written by Shimon Bar Yochai or channeled by Moshe de Leon's school, and really has Shimon Bar Yochai as its author. So again, if you have questions, put them in chat. So the Zohar is structured as a commentary on the Torah. And this is actually pretty important and fundamental. The assumption in Judaism is there is nothing deeper or closer to God than Torah. As you get into some of the mystical teachings, you will hear the idea that God created the Torah, before God created the universe. So the text will read that just as an architect needs a set of plans to build a building, God needed a set of plans to create the universe, and the set of plans was the Torah. So from a Jewish point of view, spirituality, I hope I mentioned this last time, spiritual insights all revolve around digging deeper and deeper and deeper into sacred texts. And these texts are generally or often commentaries on Torah. The font is the Torah. The process is asking every question and any question that you could possibly think of, and you'll see how we get into it as we continue. So it's written in Aramaic. In it, we read of a brilliant rabbi of 2,000 years ago wandering the Galilee with his disciples. This should sound familiar to more than a few of you. And particularly if you understand the historical context in which the Zohar is written, the Zohar being written in the 1200s, 1300s in Spain, is written during a time of absolute maximum persecution by the Church of Jews living in Spain. So you have this story. Well, guess what? We had a rabbi wandering the Galilee with disciples giving brilliant insights also. The Zohar provides a structure to the study and practice of Kabbalah. It introduces the 10 Sefirot, which I will be introducing this evening, and is very, very difficult, even in good translation. And here's the example I always use. This is part of the text of the Zohar's commentary. If you look down here, it says Zohar Bereshit. Bereshit is the opening section of the Torah. It's the opening Torah portion. And this is pretty early in the commentary. So what's being described here is the process of creation of the universe. So I'm going to read it just to give you a sense of the difficulty in the text and also the beauty of the text. At the head of the potency of the king, he engraved engravings in luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed. From the head of infinity, a cluster of vapor forming in formlessness, thrust in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. As a cord surveyed, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, splaying colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of Ein Sof. Ein Sof means without end, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. It split and did not split. Its aura was not known at all until under the impact of splitting, a single concealed supernal point shone. Beyond this point, nothing is known, so it is called Reshit, beginning, first command of all. And as I mentioned in Dr. Matt's translation and commentary, this is accompanied, just this one little paragraph, by 3 pages of notes of 13 different footnotes. And again, even as I study and prepare for this class, I learn more and more insights. The fact that there was no color, the levels of the Sefirot, some of you will know what I'm talking about, others will in a few minutes, are associated with different colors. So what the Zohar here is describing is the very, very beginning, which is up at the top of the structure of the Godhead, which is absolutely unknowable to the universe. Here's a little Zohar, and I mean that quite literally. Here's a little Zohar. That's actually, well, that's the book I'm holding. This is, I don't know where I got it, but when I was a rabbi, people would contribute lots of books to synagogues, and very few of them would be picked up by people. I would love to give them to bar and bat mitzvah kids. This one is not particularly old. It was published in the year 2000, and it's it is a mystical commentary, and it's really small. So I would need a magnifying glass to read it. I'm going to try and hold it up a little bit. You can get a sense. I'll see. You can see it with my finger there. It's really small. And it begins with the 72 names of God, which is a mystical understanding of the names of God, which I know, I would say, almost nothing about. But I want to read, if you go to Amazon.com and want to buy one of these, this is what they say. It has been said that, that's a very wide open description. It has been said that just owning the Zohar can protect you and aid in your healing. You do not need to know Hebrew. In fact, that's a misnomer because this is in Aramaic, it's not Hebrew. In fact, most of it is so condensed that you cannot read it. The 72 names for healing can be scanned, however, and can elicit the energy of healing. It is a beautiful small book that can fit in your pocket. Yes, it can. Here's a demonstration. There it is in my pocket. Glove compartment, purse. The gold lettering on the cover is expertly done. Pinchas is a section of the Zohar that involves healing, protection, and blessing. The energy of this small book is transmitted into your soul. It's like owning a piece of the Torah. Do yourself a favor and bring to yourself the energy and light of the Zohar. This, I think, is an example of magical thinking, which I absolutely does not make sense to me. But I have to tell you an incident. I was once eating in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley, at a falafel place. And clearly this place was owned by Jews who were interested in Hasidic Judaism, in fact, Chabad, because there's a picture of the Rebbe. And sitting above the condiment section, you know, where you can get hot peppers and coleslaw and all sorts of interesting things. Sitting above that is this, is this collection of Zohar with the Aramaic and the English. Just in case, with your falafel or whatever you happen to be eating, you want to read a little Zohar, just casually. Presumably, you understand Aramaic really well, and you just want to read a little Zohar. No, the idea was, the belief was that the owner of this place, that simply having a physical copy of the Zohar would provide some mystical protection to you. And that's, of course, what we're reading the Amazon condition. And, you know, I agree with Bryce. Confusing and contradictory sentences doesn't make for truly mystical writing, but I would say that people dealing in the depths of mysticism, writing authentically about mystical traditions, are going to produce writing that, unless you're initiated into it, would be confusing and may even be contradictory. And some of it just has to do with jargon. And we'll actually see some of that in the text. And Murray, I see your hand up. I just want to see. Yeah, okay, this is a good place to for a question or two. So Murray.
Thanks. Sorry if you answered it last time. I missed. I wanted to ask you, you seem to know a lot about the Kabbalah, but the name, I mean, Kabbalah is Kabbalistic. It should be a secret. You shouldn't really know much about it, or this Zohar could be just a decoy. I mean, the whole point of a Kabbalah is a secret society. You know?
No, we did talk about this a little bit. I would say I don't think of Kabbalah and Kabbalistic teaching as being secret.
You think of it as mysticism.
Oh, I'm sorry?
You've been using the word mysticism, which is different from a secret.
Yes, but I don't think of it as secret in the sense of trying to hide from people what's going on. There is a concern that it will be misunderstood, which is very real. So there are traditions in Kabbalah which say you should only teach it one-on-one, between one teacher and one student. So the likelihood of being misunderstood will be much less. One of the things we talked about is it should only be taught to well-grounded adult who
I've heard that you should be 40.
yes, yeah, we talked about this. And the reason is
The question
go ahead.
is, you keep this is Jewish mysticism.
Yes.
But what part of the Bible isn't mystical?
Oh, well, okay, we'll actually talk about that. So I would say, and we will definitely get into this. So think about the story of Noah and the ark. Okay, so you read it simply. You read it in the Golden Book of Bible stories. There are exhibits, in the Skirball Center.
You sing it at camp.
I'm sorry?
You sing the song at camp.
Right. So there is a surface reading of Bible. We'll see that's called Pshat, which is not mystical. And then we get into it. The mysticism has to do with getting deeper and deeper. Bryce.
So, apropos of what I just wrote, I mean, a couple of pages ago or slides ago, I was looking at some of the writing, and this is not exactly what it was, but it's like saying, then was revealed the most brilliant dark, and it's like, and it's like, it reminds me a little bit of W.C. Fields, where he points to two guys, and he said, the McGonagall twins, the world's shortest giant and the world's tallest midget. They defy science.
So I would say I understand why it reminds you of that, but had you spent years of your life studying these texts, you would see other elements of it. For example, the colors refer to individual Sefirot. The idea of the spark refers to the origin of the universe, which begins, like in physics, with a primordial atom. So what I would say is, if you just read it, I would absolutely agree with you. But it's kind of like if I opened up my kids, I used to drive my kids crazy when I wanted them to go to sleep and they refused and they said, read us a story, I would take out a quantum mechanics textbook and I would read them quantum mechanics, and it would drive them crazy, and then they would send me away and they would go to sleep. To me, the quantum mechanics textbook was saying something real. As far as they were concerned, it was absolute gobbledygook. And I think there's some of the same thing here.
Yeah, and in a way, I can understand that, because, the quantum mechanical textbook requires an enormous amount of knowledge and understanding that is not in the quantum mechanical textbook.
Right.
That assumes you already know it.
Yes.
All right. So how would you study Zohar? I mean, you couldn't study quantum mechanics if the first thing they did was give you a quantum mechanical textbook.
Right. So how would you study Zohar? You would be living in a community where you started studying Bible at 3 and 4 years old, started studying Mishnah at 6 years old. This is actually in the Mishnah. You become responsible for commandments at 13, and so on. You go to Jewish services every day of your life, 3 times a day. And you're well versed in all of these texts. So the people who are Kabbalists have in their brain the entire Torah, probably a very substantial portion of Talmud and Zohar. So that's how you study it. You go deeper and deeper, but you don't think you're going to get it from a 3-session introduction to Kabbalah class. What I'm trying to do is just give you a taste of what's going on here. And as I mentioned last time, for me, I need to hear it about 10 times before it starts making sense. Okay, deeper and maybe even more confusing is the idea of the Sefirot. The Sefirot, the word Sefirot comes from the word for counting. And by studying these texts, the Kabbalistic, the authors of the Zohar, and later commentators come up with an insight into the nature of God. And what's going on here is, it begins with something I mentioned last time. If the Torah tells us God created humanity in God's image after God's likeness, that then gives us a hint about the nature of God, and it also gives us a hint about the nature of humanity. how do I put flesh on that? Is I study the text deeper and deeper and deeper. So, for example, just with simple Torah, the nature of God. There's a text in Genesis, in Genesis 12, that God visits Abraham while, according to the text, just after Abraham has circumcised himself, and presumably is in pain and healing. So the understanding is, just as God visits people who are sick and healing, so we should visit people who are sick and healing. So that's kind of at a very, simple level, what you call, I think in Latin, imitatio Dei, imitating God. So the reason I mention the Sefirot here is you almost can't get around Kabbalistic texts and Kabbalistic books without seeing this image. So if nothing else, you should be familiar with this tenfold image of the nature of God. And as on this side of the page, you can see the origin of the structure has to do with something like the origin of with the structure of people. Right side, left side. At the top is Keter, which means crown, so it's something to do with the head. There's a right side, there's a left side. And then there's pages and pages and pages of material. I'm just really beginning to get this. I'm actually very excited about beginning to get it. But broadly speaking, what happens is at the top you have something called Keter, the crown. And this still is an aspect of God that is not interacting with the universe. So in a way, the Sefirot are the ways in which God interacts with the universe. And there's a lot of discussion that is called in Hebrew shefa, which means flow. And it's the flow of divine energy, divine wisdom, divine impact from the various levels of the Sefirot. Barbara's asking, where is Ein Sof? Ein Sof is above this. So Ein Sof is not one of the 10 Sefirot, it's above it. And Ein Sof means without end. It's also called nothing, meaning no thing. There is no thingness to Ein Sof. So it enters the mind of God to create the universe. And this begins with Chachma. And I don't know how well you can see this, but Chachma, which means wisdom, has a point. And in that text that we just read, it's called Reshit, or beginning. So the understanding here is the beginning of the universe is a point. And if you're thinking sperm, you're thinking along these same lines. There's a lot of sexuality associated with the Kabbalah. And the point is inserted into Bina, which means understanding, but it's also womb or palace. So the idea is God creates a point. That's what we read about in that confusing paragraph. It gets placed in Bina, and Bina gives birth to the lower Sefirot. And there are 7 lower Sefirot. And you will recognize the number 7 comes up in Judaism all the time. 7 days of the week, 7 week of weeks in the holiday of Shavuot. And then there's a complicated system here. There's a right side and a left side. There are patriarchs and matriarchs associated with each of these Sefirot. There's a central Sefirot, which is Tiferet, which means splendor. And I'm just reading from the text here: beauty, Rachamim, which is compassion, blessed, Holy One, heaven, sung, harmony, king, the color green. Whereas here's white and here is red. And then, so these are the 2 arms, Chesed and Gevurah, a central body of Tiferet, and then right leg and left leg. And then Yesod, and again, if you read this is actually from Danny Matt's Zohar. Yesod is a phallus, a penis. And then Shekhinah is the bride of God, is the feminine aspect of God. And this develops as Judaism develops. In the Bible, we see the word Shekhinah And Shekhinah is understood in the Bible to mean the presence of God. The root of the word Shekhinah is shachen, which means neighborhood. The modern Hebrew term for neighborhood is shechonah. The temple where God dwells, God's neighborhood, is called the Mishkan. And all of the prayer books in the Reform movement are called, Mishkan Tefillah, Mishkan Refuah, and so on, meaning the temple. So that's the biblical meaning of the word Shekhinah. And then as we get into mystical and mythical texts, Shekhinah becomes the bride of God, a feminine aspect of God. One of the reasons for that is Shekhinah itself is a feminine word. All Hebrew words are gendered, either masculine or feminine. Shekhinah is feminine. And if you really want to, I think I have one entire episode of my class on mythology on the Shekhinah. So if you want to see some really pretty wild aspects of the imagery of the Shekhinah, I encourage you to check out that class. And what does the male aspect, the phallus, and the Shekhinah do? They connect. Remember, the whole key here is flow and connection. And one of the aspects we discussed in a Temple Adat Elohim program, the existence of evil, and in a Kabbalistic sense, evil has to do with when this system gets out of balance. So you have God's sort of aspect of love and compassion and judgment and, deen and justice. And if they're balanced, the world is okay. But if the world is overwhelmed with judgment, that's not good. And if the world is overwhelmed with compassion, that's not good. There has to be a balance, and the whole system has to flow. So the idea here is that above this is Ein Sof. There's an aspect of God which is unknowable. We can talk about it, we can give it a name, but there is no tradition in Judaism that says that you can connect with that element of God. We connect with God through the elements of the Sefirot. And generally speaking, what I see in these discussions is it's always the 7 lower levels of Sefirot. So people asked about chakras. I do think there's commonality here. And Alyssa, you have your electronic hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Locker. I don't know that this is a formal question, but sort of just a connection that I wanted to see your thoughts on. I was reading Magic of the Ordinary by Gershon Winkler and really enjoying that. And he made a point that sort of the translation of B'Tselem Elohim that I grew up with, kind of being, the image of God. We are all made in like what we interpret as the physical likeness of God, is based on a name for God that is more related to a creating force. So it's not so much that his argument was that Elohim is more related to Genesis and sort of the chaos of creation. And his kind of connection is that if we think just in, our bodies are in the likeness of God, which is good and true, we're missing that the way that we are truly like God is that we are constantly in creation mode, even when we don't think we are, that everything about our existence is chaos. And I was kind of thinking about that in context with the Sefirot, which are so body specific, but then you speak about the literal creation of conception and things like that. So I was just kind of wondering how you feel about that sort of translation nuance, and also if you feel like that changes how the Sefirot are understood or does not.
One of the things that we're going to talk about next week is the word Tselem can also mean shadow. And so if we're God's shadow, what does that tell us? And I'm really going to get into this. I love this idea. I even wrote a song. Maybe I'll sing it next week. We are God's shadow. We'll get into it. In the opening of Genesis, God is always called Elohim. And only in the Garden of Eden, God is always called Adonai Elohim, or Yud He Vav He Elohim. And the rabbis come to understand that Elohim, which can also mean judges and also represents other gods, pagan gods, refer to God's aspect of judgment, whereas Yud He Vav He refers to God's aspect of compassion. So let me move on. And this one, I just came across another book I'm reading by Horowitz, sorry, which I think is important for us to keep in mind, because I often hear Jews denigrating Christianity as not being monotheistic, because Christians talk about the Godhead having three aspects: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So this is Abulafia, a 13th century Spanish mystic, saying, just as the Gentiles say that he is three and three are one, so also some of the Kabbalistic masters believe and say the Godhead is 10 Sefirot, and the 10 Sefirot are one. So next time you start denigrating Christianity because it holds with the idea of God having three aspects, keep in the back of your mind that the Kabbalah speaks of 10 aspects of God. Okay, I mean, we've just started this, and believe me, I have to be through it 10 times before I even get a clue. But any questions before I jump into Gematria?
I wanted to make a quick observation, if I may. The last person who was speaking, the point about chaos interested me because, again, I became self-aware and I thought to myself, there are, I don't know, trillions of cells within me,
right?
Each acting kind of independently, but also in unison. There's mitochondria and other things, zillions of them floating around in me, but I'm not aware of them. I'm just aware of the whole. And there might even be foreign bodies and bacteria in me that help me digest.
There are lots, yes.
So, I mean, yes, when you talk about chaos, a human, animal, or I guess any other creature that has some kind of symbiosis, I mean, it's just an explosion of activity that goes on.
So the interesting question is that chaos? I have a lot of, the number of bacteria in the gut are in the billions, and I think that the number of species are in the hundreds of thousands.
It's chaos, yet.
No, it's complex. So there's the question.
Yes, complex.
Is it chaos or complexity?
In biology, they teach you homeostasis. Why do we stay 98.6? Because there's something, there's the DNA directing this chaos.
Right. So it is, I would say it is, I would describe it as astoundingly complex. And one of the reasons I believe in God is the complexity. But I would not describe it as chaotic, although if I could get a super microscope and watch what's going on in my stomach as I attempt to digest the burrito that I ate for dinner, it might look pretty chaotic. Barbara.
I just had a quick question about the diagram, this 10 Sefirot. On one diagram, it said Din, like on the left side, but the two others have Gevurah. So is that the same?
No, Gevurah and Din are two different things. And in fact, if you look here, it says Gevurah is the name, and it says Din, judgment, and so on. Gevurah means power or powerful. That says Gevurah. Oh, that's interesting. That one says Din. Yeah, these Sefirot are known. These Sefirot are known by different names, and by colors and by representatives. Bryce.
Yeah, a couple things. One, I wanted to address the chaos issue, and chaos literally is something entirely different from complexity. If the human body were actually chaotic, you would have no homeostasis. It wouldn't be able to happen. But also, when I'm looking at the Sefirot
is the plural. Sephirah is singular.
Sefirot. Yeah. I'm looking at the connection diagram, and it must not mean much because every one of them is different.
So what I would say is, you're absolutely right. Every one of them is different, and it's because there are different levels of meaning. So one diagram can't encompass it all. It would be like, trying to represent a well, a globe, three-dimensional object on two dimensions. Things are going to get distorted, but I would say it refers to more levels of connection rather than meaningless. Okay, I want to get into Gematria. So this is kind of fun because it will lead to things with which most of you are familiar. So a very simple form of Gematria simply recognizes there are 22 letters in the alphabet, and the first 10 letters are the numbers 1 through 10. The 11th letter is 20, and we go up by tens until we get to 90, and then we get 100, 200, 300, 400. That's as far as we can go in the Hebrew numbering system. Many of you will be familiar with the idea of giving in units of 18 because of Chai. So Chai is Chet Yud. If we look it up here, Chet has a value of 8, Yud has a value of 10. So the numerical value of Chai, the word for life, is 18. So that leads to a custom which is really Ashkenazi of making donations, giving, looking for numbers connected with 18. By the way, in the Sephardic world, the equivalent number is 5 because of the Chamsa, God's protective hand. Chamesh, Chamsa refers to the number 5. There, I will point out, but won't present, there are, I think, at least 20 different Gematria systems where all of these letters, instead of this one being 1, you would take all the numbers squared. And then a word can either be the sum of the squares or the sum together, everything squared. And then, of course, the Gematria systems where you work backwards. So the rabbis weren't distracted by the Olympics, by CNN and cable news and the internet and YouTube. They didn't have any videos of cute kittens to watch. And so they were looking for hidden meanings in the text. And Gematria is a very significant one of these. So the one I want to point out is how Gematria affects the tying of Tzitzit. In the Hebrew Bible, it says, when you wear a garment with 4 corners, on the corners you should attach Tzitzit. Tzitzit is understood as tassels or fringes. But the Bible doesn't tell us a word about how to tie them. What is a tzitzit? It actually talks about a cord of blue. And in this picture here, you can see a cord of blue. I also have a very large tallit that I use actually to make a chuppah out of. And I don't know, well, you can see the blue there. It may not be focusing so well, but you can see the blue. And a Ashkenazi tallit has at each corner a double knot, 7 coils, a double knot, 8 coils, a double knot, 11 coils, a double knot, 13 coils, and then a double knot. And there's 8 threads in the tzitzit. Everybody with me so far? So the question is, how did the rabbis come up with this way to tie the tallit? The tallit is a prayer shawl. By the way, the reason we wear a prayer shawl is you can look at what you're wearing right now. Most of us aren't wearing garments at the moment with 4 corners. And if you're a Jew, particularly Kabbalistically inclined, but I would say even, the normal average Jew, your life revolves around wanting to be able to fulfill commandments. So we've got this commandment which says if I wear a garment with 4 corners, put on tzitzit. Well, I'm not wearing 4 corners right now. Maybe in Roman times with togas, I would be wearing 4 corners. So I will put on a prayer shawl that has 4 corners so I can fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit. And you may know that very traditional Jews will have one of these under their shirt all the time, many times showing the tzitzit, because the text actually tells us why we do this. It says, when you look at the tzitzit, you will remember the commandments. So that's going to be a hint why it's tied this way. And also, it tells you when you look at it, you want to see it. At night, you can't see it. Remember, back in those days, there wasn't a lot of street lighting. So you see it. So the tzitzit becomes a daytime commandment. Since it's a positive daytime commandment, it's considered binding only on men and not on women. Jane.
So does the total number mean anything?
Oh, we're going to get into it. So hold your breath. Here we go. You ready? Okay. So here's the word tzitzit. So first thing we're going to do is just look at the gematria of the word tzitzit. Tzadi is 90, Yud is 10, 90, 10, and 400. There's 600. Okay? But there are 5 knots in each of the tzitzit, and there are 8 strings in each of the tzitzit. If I add all of these up, I get 613. And you may know that in Jewish tradition, we understand that if you read the Bible really carefully, actually just the Torah really carefully, you can count 613 commandments. Okay, but wait, there's more. So the first group is 7, the number of days of creation, the lower Sefirot, the days of the week, and so on. The second group of windings is 8. That's the number of days until Brit Milah, until circumcision. And the sum of the first 2 groups, 7 and 8, are 15. And that's the first 2 letters of Yud He Vav He. Yud is 10, He is 5. The third group is 11. That's the sum of the last 2 numbers of Yud He Vav He. Vav is 6, He is 5. And the fourth group, 13, is the value of Echad. Aleph is 1, Chet is 8, Dalid is 4. So the total number of windings is the gematria of the phrase Adonai Echad. And you remember from last time, Adonai Echad is a key element in Jewish mysticism. So not only when I look at these tzitzit, do I see, if I know the code, the number of commandments, but I also see a reminder about the oneness of God. And then, of course, more on the value, and it goes on and on, of the word echad. Aleph 1, the 1 Tallit, Chet 8 strings in each of the tzitzit, and Dalid 4 corners of the tzitzit. I am certain that I could keep going on and on about this. Here's some elements of the tzitzit. I know this is not going to be so easy to read. I should probably just make it like 3 or 4 slides and make it bigger and more easy to read. But this is from a traditional Orthodox Sidur. So this is page 5, Shacharit, morning service, the prayers and the customs for putting on the Tallit and the Tefillin. And of course, all these would be recited in Hebrew. I didn't include the Hebrew, but I did include the translation. L'shem yichud. I'm doing this, I'm putting on my Tallit. I'm reciting the following declaration of intent before putting on the Tallit. For the sake of the Holy One, blessed be he and his presence. Okay, here we go with translation. The word presence is Shechinato. So the unification of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, the Shechinato, the male and the female aspect, God's male aspect and female aspect. In fear and love to unify the name. So we want to unify the name. Remember, in the end of every service, we say, Bayom Hahu, Yihi Adonai Echad U'Shemo Echad. In that day, Bayom Hahu, Adonai Echad, God, Yihi Adonai Echad. God will be one, U'Shemo Echad, and God's name will be one. What does it mean that God's name is not one? In some day in the future, God's name will be one. This is referring to the idea that at the moment, God is not completely together. The Shekhinah, God's presence in the world, is in exile. And the image, which is quite a beautiful image, is, we're in exile because of our sins and so on. I can talk more about that. It's appropriate to do so. Sunday was Tisha B'Av, or Monday was Tisha B'Av. The commemoration is another of these phrases. I just assume everybody knows what I mean by Tisha B'Av, of course. It's this 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, commemorating the destruction of the temple. So the idea is the temple was destroyed because of our sins, so we are sent into exile, right? We're living all over the planet, not all concentrated in the Holy Land. So the imagery here is it's like a king whose children disobeyed him, or even wife disobeyed him. There is a there's a troublesome element of a hurtful husband here. Wife disobeys him, so the king, or children disobey. Let me stick with the children image. The king's children disobey him, so he sends his children into exile. But because he so loves his children, he sends himself into exile in the form of the Shekhinah to watch over his children, and will be unified again when the Messiah comes. The world will be unified, and Jews doing mitzvot, like putting on a Tallit, aids in that unification. We're going to talk more about that. I can't remember whether it's tonight.
Rabbi,
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question going back the one page to the numbers and the this and the, adding it up. It's almost, what came first? I'm just curious to know whether somebody counted and said, okay, let's figure out how can we get it that it means a number of days to create.
Okay, so what I would say is the Torah text says, when you see the Tzitzit, you will remember the commandments. Therefore, I would say that the rabbis deliberately tied it in this way to remember the commandments.
Okay.
Is this now an accident? Am I over-interpreting it? I'm not sure. Because if you look for numerical patterns, you will find them whether they're there or not. So
Right.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay. Then you say, okay, so in fear and love to unify the name Yud K Vav K. The name Yud He Vav He is so sacred, we don't even spell it out in text. We say Yud K Vav K in perfect unity in the name of all Israel. I am ready to wrap my body in Tzitzit so that my soul, my 248 organs, and my 365 sinews, which add up to 613, wrapped in the illumination of Tzitzit, which has a numerical value of 613. I don't believe this is the actual number of organs and sinews, but they did. So that the commentary here is my 248 organs and so on. The sage's computation of the important organs, 248, is also equal to the number of positive commandments, while the 365 sinews equal the number of negative commandments. And that symbolizes the principle that man was created to perform God's will. And I'm just saying, this is in a normal Orthodox prayer book. Even the shapes of letters hold mystical meaning. And this is an example I was taught, which I particularly like. So consider the Hebrew word for truth, which is emet. Each letter is very well balanced. The aleph has two legs. The mem has a long bottom and a little stabilizing toe there. The taf also has two legs with a little bit of extra stabilization. And if that weren't enough, the aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The taf is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mem is the middle letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Truth is incredibly well balanced. Now consider the word for falsehood or lie, which is sheker. And I must admit, I deliberately chose this font, so the shin would even be wobbly. You can find fonts where the shin is a little more stable, but irrespective, the kuf is on one toe. On ballet, I guess this would be on point, and she's not even balanced. And the resh also on one toe and also out of balance. And shin, kuf, resh are the three penultimate letters of the Hebrew Bible. So they are incredibly poorly balanced. Truth is well balanced. Sheker, lies, are highly imbalanced. And we see that actually from the shape of the letters. Murray.
Hi. Yeah, as a chemist, I always see these as like chemical formula, where aleph is just an atom, emet would be a molecule. I've also seen this with Ra versus Tov, the letters.
Yeah.
If that can be explained there, because Ra is evil and Tov is good.
Yeah, Ra is more chaos and a self-gratification where tov is good. But again, one of my themes is Hebrew has many, many shades of meaning. Jane, I presume you don't have a question.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I got your hand.
Thanks.
Okay. Whole other subject has to do with the 4 levels of the world and spiritual awareness. Again, I'm introducing this so you know this exists. The Kabbalistic understanding is the entire universe, the world, everything operates on 4 different levels of spirituality. And they each relate to different relationships to God. So at the lowest level is Asiyah. This is the world in which we live our lives and understand our own separate identity. It is a world far from mystical insight. It's a world in which we perceive God as a transcendent other outside ourselves, the object of our yirah, which is fear and awe, as a trusted or loving king. It's a disconnection from God. God is up there, we're down here. Asiyah is, I got to charge my cell phone. I have to put gas in my car. It's not necessarily spiritual, but I got to do it to keep going. So the relationship with God is one of fear and awe. The other, a king, a ruler up there with power over me. Next level, Yetzirah, formation. In this level, we begin to lose our level of separateness, recognizing that there are higher forms of life or deeper rungs of perception. God is perceived as a loving parent who knows and loves us fully, who accepts us with all of our shortcomings, but who also cares enough to make demands upon us. The symbol of the world of Yetzirah is the angel. To Yirah, fear, awe, is added Ahava, love, in our relationship with God, who becomes, in the words of the Yom Kippur liturgy, High Holiday liturgy, and by the way, this is in traditional liturgy as well, Avinu Malkeinu. God is both Avinu, our parent, literally our father, Malkeinu, our ruler, our king. So the relationship is one of both love and demands. Parent, closer than a king. Bariah, creation. Here we begin to see the great vision that there is only one reality, there is only one. I'll just read. Love is the dominant motif in the relationship between God and person. God as parent is replaced by God as lover, as in the Song of Songs. In this stage, we give vent to our longing to reunion with the source, the embrace of the soul in the arms of the beloved. And there's some quotes from the Song of Songs. The Zohar is a key insight into this world. In this world, however, there is consciousness that I am is still present. I'm the one who's perceiving this reality. My relationship with God now isn't only king, parent, but lover. And not only in the Platonic sense, but also in the erotic sense. For the rabbis certainly understood the power of erotic attraction and erotic love, and they saw that same power as a attraction to God. And in the highest level, Atzilut, here from Arthur Green. Here the lines between self, small s, and self, capital S, no longer exist. So in that chart I showed last week, there is no distinction between anything and God. Everything is all God all the time. Macrocosmic universe and microcosmic mind are a pair of mirrors that stand opposite each other. They reflect each other so fully that any attempt to distinguish between them has to be left behind. In Atzilut, there is nothing other than the emanation or flow of divine grace. We no longer speak of the love between self and God because between no longer exists. You are not other than God. Within the human mind, Atzilut is usually present only in brief moments, in flashes of insight that pass quickly, but remain with us in the memory to light the rest of our lives. The Kabbalists I know speak of these moments of insight where you completely lose yourself and you are one and connected with everything. And then it, as you say to yourself, wow, or, I just felt something amazing. Once you use the word I, you've lost it. Because in that moment, there is no such thing as I. You are connected and joined with the universe. So here, yourself is connected with the capital self. And Cheryl is asking the question, if your tzitzit are damaged, is your life going to be harmed? I don't believe so, but I know people who would absolutely believe so. I think you've heard me talk about a case in which I was flying either into Israel, away from Israel, and I met, sitting in the next seat was a Hasidic Jew, and he had a very mangled hand. And as we got to talking about Judaism, religion, he said that his hand was mangled in an industrial accident. And once this happened, he was told by his rabbis to examine his mezuzahs. And in the scroll of one of the mezuzahs, where the phrase is, bind these as a sign upon your hand, al yadacha, the word for yad had flaked off. So that's the reason that his hand was mangled. So my own opinion is that has magical teaching. I have problems with that on lots of levels. And but people believe it. So you know, I probably have 8 or 9 different talitot. There's a tradition that you're buried with your talis, but you cut off one tzitzit so as not to be seeming to mock the other bodies in the ground that you're actually praying while you're dead. I'll tell one other story. I was working with a young man for his bar mitzvah, and his family dug out, you know, grandpa or great grandpa's talis to give to him, and the tzitzit were damaged. I mean, they were untied in some cases. And I had a wonderful time with this young man teaching this material, and using the same strings, we untied it completely and retied the tzitzit. Let me move along. Time is marching. Okay, this is actually something I covered a little bit. God's names, Adonai and Elohim. Adonai is the name we say when we read God's actual name, Yud-He, Vav-He, in the Torah or prayer book. It literally means my Lord, and it's in the plural. So it means technically my Lord's. And it's said because the actual name was only pronounced by the high priest in the Holy of Holies in the temple on Yom Kippur afternoon. Traditional Jews don't even say or write the word Adonai except when reading the Torah or actually praying. The mystics see meaning even in the shape of the letters. Remember what I said about shape of letters? So this is kind of fun to follow. Here is the letter Yud. The smallest of the letters represents Chachma, that primordial point. If you look at the Yud, again, it depends how large it is on your screen. The tip is pointing up, hinting at Keter, and even Ein Sof above Keter. But the in essence, so elusive it can't be captured. The first Hey, it's an open structure, is Bina, a primal female into which the Yud enters. So it looks like an opening. It looks like a womb. Yud, the primal spark, is going to enter the primal womb. Vav stands for the number 6. Again, if you count it, it would be the number 6, representing the 6 forces surrounding Tiferet. It's an elongation of the Yad. The Yad becoming longer becomes a Vav, and thus becomes a phallus-like embodiment of male energy within God. A second Hey, again female, becomes the home of the Vav, the Ark of the Covenant, home of the soul. The numerical value of the name 26 is the subject of much comment. If you see 26, nothing else you remember, look for the number 26. Number 26 is the Gematria of God's name. In the Sephardic world, you know, when Sonia was married, they waited till the 26th of the month to have her marry on the 26th. Both of her granddaughters, my granddaughters, have birthdays on the 26th, just saying. The words ahava, love, and echad have the value of 13. Love and oneness are then joined to make up the name of God. And we just keep going on and on. Elohim is a generic word for God, used to describe both God and false gods. The mystics often assign the name Elohim to the aspect of God's judgment, and Yud He Vav He to God's aspect of, I would say, compassion rather than love. The balance to the names is found in the Shema, where the word Elohim is found between two repetitions of Adonai. Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Okay, and this is actually from another book which is on your reading list, which is the Jewish Light's Spirituality Handbook. Very nice, short sections on spirituality. Okay, text and more text. I am going to read through text, and there's one that I adore, which I want to get to, and then we'll have some discussion. So this is from Moses Cordovero, 16th century. When powerful light is concealed and clothed in a garment, it is revealed. Though concealed, the light is actually revealed. For were it not concealed, it could not be revealed. First reading of this, it's nonsense. Its dazzle conceals it. It's like wishing to gaze at the dazzling sun. Its dazzle conceals it, for you cannot look at its overwhelming brilliance. Yet when you conceal it, looking at it through screens or a filter, like when you watch an eclipse, you can see and not be harmed. So it is with emanations. By concealing and clothing, it reveals itself. With the appearance of light, the universe expanded. With the concealment of the light, the things that existed were created in all their varieties. This is the secret of the act of creation. There is a phrase you see in Hebrew a lot, hamavin yavin. The word mavin is maven. The one who understands will understand. So with the appearance of light, the universe expanded like the Big Bang explosion. Once the overall density was reduced via expansion, the universe ceased being a black hole and light could appear. And then most things can only exist in places on other than a star. So let me move on. Another important thing. 4 levels of understanding Torah. You will see this a lot. If you go to Torah study, you will see a discussion of what is called Pardes. Pardes means paradise, or it can also mean a garden. But it's an acronym to represent the 4 levels of interpretation of Torah. The Pei is for the word pshat, which is the simple meaning of the text. You know, the Garden of Eden story, you have a serpent, you have fruit being eaten, they're expelled. There's a simple meaning of the text. Talk about simple meaning of Noah's Ark. Okay, it's a story. By the way, one text which I didn't give you, which is quite beautiful, is I think it's from the Zohar, is the rabbis are saying, if the meaning of Torah were only the simple meanings, we could do a better job. We could write better stories than what we find in the Torah. Clearly, the meaning has to be deeper. So the next level is remez, which is a hint or an allegory. So here in crossing the sea and having the sea close in, you get a hint that this may be a birth canal, and the waters are the waters of giving birth. And if that were too subtle, the Hebrew word for Mitzrayim, the Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim means narrow places. So we escape through the narrow places by dividing the waters, and the Hebrew nation is born. So that's an allegorical meaning of the text. Then we have drash, which is midrash. It's digging deeper into words. So I've mentioned this before. When Cain murders Abel, God famously asks Cain, "Where's your brother?" Cain famously answers, "How do I know? Am I your brother? Am I my brother's keeper?" And God says, "I hear your brothers," and it's always translated, "your brother's blood crying out to me." Except the word in the text is in the plural. So it doesn't seem to make sense that God hears Abel's bloods crying out to him. And the rabbis say, why is it in the plural? Because what was crying out to God was not only Abel's blood, but the blood of all the children that will never be born to Abel. And this leads to a interpretation in the Talmud that when you murder one person, it's as if you destroyed an entire world. And when you save one life, it's as though you saved an entire world. And some of you may have seen at the end of the movie Schindler's List,
Yes.
you have a long list, a long line
Yeah.
of people putting stones on Schindler's grave, and not only the specific Jews that Schindler saved, but all of their offspring. So that's from the Midrash, from one little letter, the Yud, the rabbis derive this whole teaching. And by the way, that same teaching is in the Quran. Looking forward to discussion of the Quran and other and Islam. And then there's a secret level of the text. So this would ask the question, why does the text, we talked about this last week, why does the Torah begin with the letter Bet? And the shape of the letter tells us we can't ask what happened before, above, or below the Torah. It also teaches that there are two Torahs, a written Torah and an oral Torah. So that's sort of a secret level. And I just came across this in the last week or so from a very well-renowned biblical commentator, Aviva Zornberg, talking about Pshat and Drash. He said, Pshat is what you tell your therapist. Drash is what your therapist hears. I really like that. Let's see, a few more texts. There was a man, so this is now, let's see what, this is from the Zohar. This is one of Danny Matt's translation. There was a man who lived in the mountains. He knew nothing about those who lived in the city. He sowed wheat and ate the kernels raw. One day he entered the city. They brought him good bread. He said, what is this for? They said, bread to eat. He ate, and it tasted very good. He said, what's it made of? They said, wheat. Later, they brought him cakes kneaded in oil. He tasted them and said, what are these made of? They said, wheat. Finally, they brought him a royal pastry made with honey and oil. He said, and what are these made of? They said, wheat. He said, I am the master of all of these, for I eat the essence of all of these wheat. Because of that view, he knew nothing of the delights of the world. They were lost to him. So it is with one who grasps the principle, but does not know all the delectable delights diverging from that principle. And here in his commentary, the Zohar symbolizes the four levels of meaning in the Torah, what we just went over, the midrashic, simple midrashic, allegorical, and mystical. The mountain man mastery is superficial. He only knows pshat. So for him, there's no point in eating bread. There's no point in eating cakes. There's no point in eating royal pastries. It's all wheat. So why bother? So for those of us who read Bible at a simple surface level meaning, yeah, it's an interesting story, but we could write better stories. But we haven't delved underneath it. There's another earlier midrashic parable that goes along some of these lines, which I also like. There was a king who had two servants. He loved them with a complete love. Whenever you have midrash about a king, they're talking about God. He gave each of them a measure of wheat and a bundle of flax. The wise servant, what did he do? He took the flax and wove it into cloth. He took the wheat and made it into flour. He sifted it, grounded it, kneaded it, and baked it. And then he arranged the table and spread the cloth over it. He left it until the king arrived. The foolish servant did nothing at all. After some time, the king came into his palace and said, my children, bring me what I gave you. One brought out the bread on the table covered with cloth. The other brought out the wheat in a box with a bundle of flax on the top. When the blessed Holy One gave the Torah to Israel, he gave it to them as wheat from which to produce bread and flax from which to produce cloth. Namely, the understanding here is God has given us a Torah, and we are supposed to work it and derive meanings and teachings and laws and traditions from it, not simply read the words. Okay, this is my favorite story from the Zohar, called The Old Man and the Ravishing Maiden. And I have greatly edited it to include only what I think are the most interesting parts, but there's a lot more going on. Again, this is from the Zohar. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi met one night at the Tower of Tyre. There they stayed as guests, delighting in one another. Rabbi Yossi said, I'm so glad to see the face of the Shekhinah. For just now, the whole way here, I was pestered by an old man, a donkey driver, who kept asking me riddles along the way. There's a tradition when two people study Torah together, the Shekhinah, the presence of God, dwells among them. Here's the riddles that the old man was asking. And there are others too that I've edited out. Who is a ravishing maiden without eyes, her body concealed and revealed? She comes out in the morning and is hidden all day. She adorns herself with adornments that are not. All this he asked on the way. I was annoyed. Now I can relax. If we had been together, we would have engaged in words of Torah instead of strange words of chaos. And then he also describes all the other riddles that the old man mentioned. Rabbi Yossi said, of all the words I heard you say, there was one that really amazed me. Either you said it out of folly or they're empty words. And the old man said, so now the old man has joined them. And which one is that? He said, the one about the ravishing maiden. And now the old man is going to start speaking. Human beings are so confused in their minds. They do not see the way of truth in Torah. She calls out to them. The word Torah is a feminine word. Remember, in Hebrew, every word is either masculine or feminine. So when we sing Etzrayim Chi Lemachazikim Ba, we're singing, she is a tree of life. She, the Torah, calls out to them every day in love, but they do not want to turn their heads. She removes a word from her sheath, is seen for a moment, then quickly hides away. But she does so only for those who know her intimately. A parable. To what can this be compared? To a beloved, ravishing maiden hidden deep within her palace. She has one lover, unknown to anyone, hidden too. Out of love for her, this lover passes by her gate constantly, lifting her eyes to every side. If you visit Muslim lands, and remember this is being written in 12th century Spain, you see houses have tiny little windows with curtains and coverings. So I get this image. Knowing that her lover hovers below her gate constantly, what does she do, this ravishing maiden? She opens a little window in her hidden palace, revealing her face to her lover, then swiftly withdraws, concealing herself. No one nears him, sees or reflects, only the lover. And his heart and his soul and everything within him flow out to her. He knows that out of love for him, she revealed herself for that one moment to awaken love within him. So it is with the word of Torah. She reveals herself to no one but her lover. Torah knows that one who is wise of heart hovers about her gate every day. What does she do? She reveals her face to him from the palace, beckoning him with a hint. The hint is one of these levels, remes. Then swiftly withdraws to her hiding place. No one there knows or reflects, he alone does. And her heart and soul and everything within him flow out to her. This is why Torah reveals and conceals herself. With love, she approaches her lover to arouse love within him. Come and see the way of Torah. At first, she begins to reveal herself to a human. She beckons him with a hint. If he perceives, good. If not, she sends him away, calling him simple. Simple is pshat. Torah says to her messenger, tell that simple one to come closer so I can talk to him. He approaches. She begins to speak with him from behind a curtain she has drawn, words he can follow until he reflects a little at a time. This is drasha. Then she converses with him through a veil, words riddled in allegory. This is agadah. She says to him, do you see that word, that hint, which I beckoned you at first? So many secrets there, this one and that one. Now he sees that nothing should be added to those words and nothing taken away. Now the pshat of the verse, just like it is. Not a single word should be added or deleted. Human beings must become aware, pursuing Torah to become her lovers. The old man was silent for a moment. The companions were amazed. They did not know if it was day or night, if they were really there or not. And then it goes on with more commentary. But the idea here is, which I adore, is the idea that Torah is a maiden and she hides herself. So the text is not so simple. It's confusing. It may seem puzzling, but to those who are, and it's a common phrase in Jewish tradition, Ohave Torah. Those who love the Torah stay with it. It's as though they're describing it as a man and a woman. A man's interested in a woman. If you just see the surface, and there are other texts which I haven't included, which talks about the surface of Torah, are the outer garments, but that's not the essence of the person. But if he is devoted to her, she reveals more and more, including taking off the garments. And this process becomes very sexual. Okay, so that's what I wanted to cover this week. And I will stop the sharing so I can see you all, and I hope you can see each other. Whoops, I can't find my Zoom. Okay. I know how to do this. Okay, so any questions, comments? I think I said last time I taught this, and this time too, after I read that, I need to take a cold shower. But any other comments about the Zohar, anything we talked about, or anything you want to ask about? Let's see.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
I thought the Hasidic Jews were more about joy and dancing and everything, and your Hasidic was more ascetic, about denial.
Okay. I'm very glad you asked that, because the two different groups of Hasids. The ascetic group was 12th and 13th century, I think, maybe 8th and 9th, I can't remember, Germany. The Hasidic movement with which you are familiar begins in the 1700s.
Oh.
And it's the originator is the Baal Shem Tov, which means master of the good name, but Baal also means husband of the good name, which means God. So it's, God's lover. And you're absolutely right. One of the initially Hasidic Judaism was a revolt against the super legalism and studying and intense scholarship of traditional Jews.
What was that movement called? Magid, was it, or the traditional following the law that they fought?
Oh, it's mitnagdim.
Okay.
Mitnagdim. Mitnagdim comes from this word keneged, which means in opposition. They were only called mitnagdim once the Hasidim, the modern Hasidism, arose. The mitnagdim were opposed to it. So they got this title of the opponents. What are they opposed to? Hasidic Judaism. And then, of course, within a generation or two, Hasidic Judaism also got into the legalism, but also never abandoned the idea of niguns and, Yai dies and dancing the hora and all that stuff to add a lot of joy to Judaism.
Did they come from each other? Did they evolve? The one from Germany, the one from Poland, did they?
No, the German Hasidic movement largely died out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a very good question and very confusing. There's a lot to be confused about. Before I call on Richard, I'm just going to answer. Oh, it was a direct question to me about the mistranslation of Jehovah.
Yeah, it was on one of your on one of the slides, one of the pages, but you skipped that particular paragraph.
Yeah, so yeah, in the interest of time, I skimmed over it.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that when we come to God's actual name, Yud He Vav He, we're not supposed to pronounce it. So when the Masoretes, about 1,000 years ago, added vowels to our texts as a way of reminding us not to say Yud He Vav He, but to say the word Adonai, they put the vowels for the word Adonai under the letters Yud He Vav He. And if you try and pronounce that as it's written, you come up with Yehovah. But people that think that the word is actually Jehovah or Yehovah never got the memo from the Masoretes. And to their credit, I've had Jehovah's Witnesses visit, and they know this. But it's definitely not Jehovah. We don't know how to pronounce God's name, but it's definitely not Jehovah.
Yeah, I have a friend who's Jehovah's Witness. That's why I asked that. What about well, I've seen it Yahweh, like
Yes.
Yaweh, I think, or something like that. Yahweh is.
Yeah, so that we don't know how to pronounce it. There's a tradition that you shouldn't try.
Okay.
And if you try, you'll never know if you're right, but you
Right.
forfeit your share in the world to come. But you're in very good company because I do it all the time. If God's name is Yahweh, then it is a verb form, which it comes from a verb form, which means the one who causes being, which is a great name for God.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
So
kind of
scholars
cool.
would say that's probably the way it should be pronounced.
Yeah.
but there's no tradition that has survived that authoritatively says that. Richard.
Right. This is it. The only one. Yeah.
In our standard prayer books, do you
Mhm.
find yourself sometimes saying, oh, there's an element of Kabbalah that maybe some rabbis might not recognize, or certainly some congregants might not recognize, but that you can see, yeah, that kind of fits in with Kabbalistic thinking. How much influence does Kabbalah have really kind of in a standard reform or conservative prayer book?
Well, let me answer that in 2 steps. Kabbalah has a lot of influence on the prayer book. There are poems, they're called piyuts. The best known one is Lecha Dodi, where the Sabbath bride, which is a stand-in for God, is imaged as a bride coming to meet her bridegroom on their wedding night. So the sexual element is there. Kabbalah has heavily influenced Judaism, and you might not notice it because you're so used to it. You know, you sing Lecha Dodi, you don't necessarily think of the mystics of Sfat. You see the Tzitzit. You know, I've been wearing Tzitzit all my life, and I talk to people who are wearing Tzitzit all their life. I have rarely come across anyone, partially because it's really hard to remember, 7, 8, 11, 13, and what the significance is, but they're wearing the Tzitzit. So it's Judaism is filled with mystical insights, but we're not necessarily aware of it.
So it's pronounced Tzit
Tzit Tzit.
Tzit.
Yes.
And why do women not wear Tzit?
The reason is laws, the positive time-bound commandments, like pray 3 times a day. Women are exempt from positive time-bound commandments. The reason is,
Babies.
I'll give you 2 reasons. You pick one. The
Babies.
traditional Jews would say
I don't know.
women are already at a higher level of spiritual awareness, and they don't need the discipline of these positive time-bound commandments. Another insight is if women have to go to the synagogue to pray in a minyan 3 times a day, who's watching the babies?
Exactly. Yeah.
And the Tallit, because it's meant to be seen, is ruled to be a time-bound positive commandment. And there was a time, I don't know if it's still true, that if at the Western Wall a man raped a woman who was wearing a tallis, she was actually subject to a higher crime than he was.
Whoa.
I remember my daughter, when she was 13 and we were in Israel, wore a tallis at the women's section of the Western Wall. And they started giving her a hard time, and she's like 4'10". And she said, well, we're Reform and we can wear a tallis. And they left her alone, which was wise, I can tell you. You don't want to mess with my daughter. But these days, that's a huge issue.
Yeah.
Women wearing tallit. And there's another issue, which is just because women are not obligated to wear a tallit, are they permitted to wear a tallit?
Right. That was my next question.
Right. So so some rabbis would say yes, some rabbis would say no. Ask your rabbi, and you're not allowed to rabbi shop till you get the answer that you like.
Okay, well, I'm asking you, what do you think?
In Reform Judaism, I would say one of the central tenets of Reform Judaism is as much as possible to treat men and women equally. So in terms of leading a prayer service, being counted at a minyan, wearing a tallit, yeah, absolutely. There's no reason to deny women that, in my judgment. And that's
good.
Yeah.
Well, we love God just as much.
Yeah, but loving God has nothing to do with it.
I know.
It's obeying the rules.
Obedience.
Yes, it's obedience. It's obedience. It's obedience. Murray.
Hi. I want to focus in on the part about Abel. You said the word bloods was in plural. How is that said in Hebrew?
It's damei achicha instead of dam achicha.
Okay, because my understanding of Kabbalah is mainly influenced by the book The Cipher of Genesis by Carlos Suarez.
Not familiar with it.
I want to write that down.
He was a French, smart guy from
Mhm.
last century. Anyway, he makes a point about the word Adam,
Mhm.
because Adam isn't his name because God looked through a baby name book. The name is symbolic of two
Yeah.
concepts. Aleph, which is silent and unknowable, which I equate with the soul, and the soul that forces the heartbeat, because your heart only beats when you're alive.
Mhm.
Dam, which is the blood that pushes.
Mhm.
So when Adam is alive, these two things are working together. But then when they are separated, then we're dead.
Okay.
But the Aleph itself is indestructible, which people think of their souls as immortal.
Mhm.
So he goes on and on about it. He also
Yeah,
talks about the
and I would
balance
say,
between Aleph and Yud, that one is 1 and one is 10, and that
Mhm.
they that comes up when God says, yeah, sure, yeah.
Mhm.
Aleph, because
Yeah,
yeah,
so
is
Murray-
Aleph, hey, Yud, hey.
So
Yes.
Murray, what I would say is that sounds like a Kabbalistic teaching to me. It's not one I've ever heard, but basically it's digging into the text to look for deeper and deeper meanings. And that is a very Kabbalistic practice. Just to
Dam is
show,
also red,
right.
which is usually like a red thread around the finger. Is that how that started?
No.
Because that's in the Bible, where the nursemaids would tie the red
Yes.
string around
Yeah, I read
the finger.
Yes. Yes.
Even
There
if
is a
the
red
baby-
thread, but I.
Even if the baby went back in, like
Right,
they were
right,
fighting in there. Or
right,
something.
right.
All right.
The other thing, just to add a level of complexity, it would be easier to do this with a drawing, but think of the letter Aleph. Visualize it in front of you. There's two little things and there's one long thing, right? Everybody with me?
Yes.
The two little things are yuds, right? So what's the value of the yud? 10. So I have a 10 here, a 10 here. A long straight line is a vav, right? A vav is 6. So I have 26. I have 26 is the broken down gematria of Aleph. And so that's God.
Actually,
And-
you just reminded me, because first of all, Hebrew also has script like we do, cursive, and also it was my understanding that the shapes of the Hebrew letters have changed over the past thousands.
Yes,
of years.
yes. Yeah, when I teach a class in Hebrew, I talk about that. Yes, the text that we're actually seeing is not Hebrew, it's Aramaic print. It's Aramaic font, you could say. The ancient Hebrew text has been lost. I mean, we find inscriptions, we find texts, we find, and some Dead Sea Scrolls, we see a little bit of ancient Hebrew. But the text that we read now is actually Aramaic font. The words are Hebrew, but the font is Aramaic. It can be a
Makes
little
sense.
confusing, or a lot confusing, depending on how many times you've heard it. After 10 times, it's not confusing at all. Okay, so I am gonna stop the recording